You don't have to yell, you don't have to fight, and you don't have to lose yourself just to deal with someone who feeds off control. The truth is, the most exhausting battles are the ones that never leave a bruise. The ones where your worth is quietly chipped away every time you're made to feel small, dismissed, or blamed for things you didn't do. If you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling drained, doubting yourself, or rehearsing in your head what you should have said, you know that pain. And here's the thing, making a narcissist miserable isn't about becoming like them. It's about learning how to stand so steady, so grounded in yourself that their favorite weapons, control, chaos, and manipulation, stop working. That's where your power is. And that's what I want to help you find again. When you've been close to a narcissist, you know it's not just the arguments that wear you down. It's the constant second guessing of yourself. It's wondering if you're overreacting, if you should have said less, if maybe you are the problem after all. That's the quiet heaviness people don't see, the part of you that feels smaller every time you're dismissed, twisted around, or made to carry the blame. And the hardest part is, you can't reason your way into peace with someone who thrives on control. But you can learn to take back what they work so hard to take from you. Your steadiness, your confidence, your voice. This isn't about revenge or outplaying them at their own game. It's about standing in a way that makes their power fade. And that's where the real shift begins. Silence is one of the most misunderstood tools in a relationship with a narcissist. When words are constantly twisted, when your intentions are rephrased to mean something you never said. When every explanation somehow ends up being used against you, silence stops being passive. It becomes powerful. Because what they thrive on is reaction. They feed on pulling you into endless loops where you're defending yourself, clarifying and trying to prove that your heart was in the right place. But here's the thing, you can't win an argument with someone who has no interest in truth, only control. The more you try to explain, the deeper you sink into their game. And the game is never about understanding you, it's about keeping you off balance. Think about the last time you walked away from one of those conversations. You probably replayed it over and over in your head, wishing you had said something different, something sharper, something that proved your point. That's the trap, because the exhaustion you feel after those conversations isn't from speaking your truth. It's from realizing it didn't matter. It never mattered to them. Silence takes you out of that trap. Silence says, I don't have to play this round. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you don't have a voice. It means you're choosing not to hand over your energy where it will only be twisted and wasted. When you stop explaining yourself to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim a piece of your peace. Silence keeps you steady when they are pushing for chaos. It's what prevents their bait from hooking you again and again. You'll notice the first time you use it, they'll push harder. They'll accuse you of being cold, of giving the silent treatment, of not caring. That's because silence breaks their pattern. They can't use your words against you if you don't give them any. And the more you practice it, the more you realize how much control you actually have over your own reactions. This isn't about shutting down. It's not about withdrawing to punish them or avoid the truth. It's about drawing a boundary without having to raise your voice or justify your choices. It's choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion. Silence creates a pause, and in that pause, you get to see the dynamic for what it really is. You get to remind yourself that their opinion of you doesn't define you, that you don't need to convince someone of your worth who is invested in denying it. And here's where the shift happens. Silence gives you space to hear yourself again. When you're not tangled up in defending every word, you start to notice what your body feels, what your heart needs, what your gut has been saying all along. That clarity is what makes a narcissist miserable. Because they can't reach it, they can't twist it, and they can't control it. Silence pulls the curtain back on their game and leaves you standing on solid ground. And from that ground, you can finally begin to move in ways that honor who you are, instead of constantly reacting to who they want you to be. Boundaries are often seen as walls, but in reality, they're doors. They don't shut people out, they decide what comes in and what doesn't. And with a narcissist, that door has usually been left wide open for far too long. They walk through it without knocking, rearranging the furniture of your life, and then convincing you that you invited them in. That's the heart of their control. The belief that your time, your energy, your emotions, even your sense of self belong to them. And because you care, because you've tried to keep the peace, you've probably allowed more than you were comfortable with, telling yourself it wasn't worth the fight. But deep down, you've felt the cost. Here's the thing about control, it only works where permission is given. Most of the time, you don't even realize you've given it because it's taken in small doses. A little guilt here, a little criticism there, a subtle rewriting of what happened until you start to doubt your own memory. That's how control creeps in. Boundaries break that cycle. Boundaries are the quiet, steady way of saying, this is mine, and you don't get to decide it for me. It's not loud, it's not cruel. It's simply refusing to hand over what was never theirs to begin with. When you set a boundary with someone who is used to crossing every line, you'll see their discomfort immediately. They'll call you selfish. They'll accuse you of being difficult, ungrateful, even disloyal. That's not proof that your boundary is wrong. That's proof it's working. Because boundaries strip away their favorite tool, access. Access to your emotions, access to your reactions, access to the places they've learned they can push and pull you. Boundaries make them face themselves, and that's the one thing they don't know how to handle. Think about it like this: when you answer every late night call, every last minute demand, every guilt-ridden request, you're teaching them that your time and energy are negotiable. But when you calmly say, "I can't talk right now," or "that doesn't work for me," you teach them something else, that you are not on the menu every time they're hungry for control. And yes, it will upset them. Yes, they will push harder at first, but boundaries are not about their comfort. They're about your health. They're about giving yourself permission to stop bleeding energy into someone who never gives any back. What's freeing is that boundaries don't require their agreement to be valid. You don't need them to approve it, understand it, or like it. You only need to honor it. That's where your power lies, not in changing them, but in choosing you. The first time you do it, your voice might shake, your chest might tighten, and every part of you might want to cave just to make the tension go away. But each time you hold steady, you'll feel something you may not have felt in a long time: strength. The kind that doesn't depend on their mood, their reaction, or their approval. And that strength is what they hate most, because when you have boundaries, they can no longer script your story. They can no longer rearrange the truth or bend you into who they want you to be. Boundaries remind them, and more importantly, remind you, that the control they thought they had was never really theirs. It was yours all along. Chaos is their playground. The raised voice, the sudden accusations, the shifting stories, the way they bait you into defending yourself over and over. It's all designed to pull you off center. Because if they can get you emotional, if they can get you reactive, they know they've got you where they want you. You've probably felt it before. The conversation starts small, and within minutes, your heart is racing, your words are tumbling out too fast, and you're saying things you didn't mean just to try to keep up. That's not an accident. That's their strategy. And the truth is, it leaves you exhausted every single time. Here's what makes this dynamic so hard: you care. You care about the relationship. You care about being misunderstood. You care about trying to fix things. And because you care, you take the bait. You jump in to defend, to explain, to prove your heart was in the right place. But with someone who thrives on chaos, the more you engage, the deeper you sink. They aren't looking for resolution. They're looking for reaction. And every time you lose your calm, it confirms their control. Holding your calm doesn't mean you stop feeling. It doesn't mean you numb yourself or pretend their behavior doesn't sting. It means you anchor yourself so deeply that their storm can't pull you under. Think of it like standing in the middle of a shouting match and realizing you don't have to shout back. You can choose steady over frantic. You can choose to breathe, to pause, to let their words hang in the air without rushing to catch them. That choice is where your power is. Because when you don't match their chaos, you take away the fuel that keeps it alive. The first time you do this, it will feel unnatural. Your whole body might want to react. Your voice will want to rise. Your hands might shake, and everything in you will be screaming to defend yourself. That's normal. It's muscle memory. But here's the shift. The longer you practice calm, the more you realize that chaos only has as much power as you give it. You don't have to win the argument. You don't have to explain your every move. You only have to stay grounded in yourself. You'll notice something else too. When you hold your calm, they push harder at first. They'll throw out sharper words, louder tones, anything to break your steadiness. That's because calm exposes the truth that they can't actually control you without your reaction. And while they may hate it, you'll start to love it. Because calm doesn't just protect you in that moment, it restores you afterward. You walk away without the same exhaustion, without the endless replay in your head of what you should have said. You walk away still intact, and that's the part they can't stand. Chaos is how they win. Calm is how you stop playing. It's not about letting them off the hook. It's about not letting them pull you off yours. When you hold your calm in the middle of their storm, you send a clear message: I don't live in your chaos anymore. I choose peace, and you can't take it from me. That's not weakness. That's strength. Quiet, steady, unshakable strength. And it's the very thing they don't know how to handle. Approval is one of the strongest levers a narcissist pulls. They dangle it in front of you like a prize, making you believe that if you just try harder, if you just say the right words, if you just don't mess up this time, maybe you'll finally earn it. And when they withhold it, it cuts deep. Because approval isn't just about validation. It's about belonging, about feeling seen, about knowing you're enough. Over time, you can get so wrapped up in chasing that nod of approval that you start shaping your choices, your words, even your identity around what might keep them satisfied. That's how quiet control takes root, not through force, but through the fear of disapproval. If you've ever felt the pit in your stomach when they frowned at you, the wave of relief when they finally softened, or the shame when they looked at you with disappointment, you know how powerful that cycle is. You start walking on eggshells, scanning the room, adjusting yourself constantly, just so you don't trigger that withdrawal of approval. And without realizing it, you're no longer living free. You're living filtered through what they think of you. That weight is heavy, and it's unfair, because at the end of the day, no matter how much you give, no matter how carefully you move, the approval you're chasing is always temporary. It shifts with their mood, their need for control, their own insecurities. It was never stable enough to hold your worth in the first place. The freedom comes the moment you realize you don't need it anymore, that your value isn't measured by their smile, their praise, or their acceptance. It's measured by the simple fact that you are already enough, whether they ever admit it or not. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It starts small. It looks like pausing before you explain yourself and asking, am I saying this because I believe it or because I want them to approve of it? It looks like choosing what brings you peace, even if it disappoints them. It looks like reminding yourself again and again that disapproval is not the same as rejection and their approval is not the same as love. When you stop needing their approval, you change the entire dynamic. The looks, the sighs, the guilt trips, they lose their grip on you. And yes, they'll notice they may push harder at first, raising the stakes, trying to pull you back into that chase. But with each step, you'll feel something grow inside you that you may not have felt in a long time: self-trust. The quiet confidence of knowing you don't have to twist yourself into knots to be worthy. That's what makes a narcissist miserable, because their control has always depended on your need for them to validate you. Take that away, and suddenly their approval becomes just one voice in the room, not the voice that defines you. And in that space, you get to hear your own voice again. You get to decide what matters, what's worth your energy, and what reflects who you truly are. That's the kind of freedom that can't be taken, only claimed. And once you claim it, you'll never need their approval to feel whole again. Manipulation thrives in uncertainty. When someone can keep you guessing, when they can move the goalposts, shift the story, or change their expectations without warning, they know they've got the upper hand. That unpredictability is what keeps you on edge, never sure if you're about to be praised or punished, accepted or rejected. And because you care about the relationship, you try to adapt, you bend, you adjust, you overthink, all in an effort to avoid the next landmine. But here's the problem: the more you adjust to their inconsistency, the more power they have to control the rhythm of your life. Consistency is what cuts through that cycle. When you decide who you are and how you respond, and you hold to it no matter how much they try to pull you off track, manipulation starts to lose its grip. Think about it this way: if every time they provoke you, they get a different reaction. One day anger, one day tears, one day endless explanation you. But if every time they push, you give the same steady response, their tactics stop working. Consistency tells them, you don't get to decide my mood. You don't get to control my reactions. I do. At first, this is hard, because manipulation often comes disguised as urgency or guilt. They'll tell you the rules have changed, that your boundary doesn't apply this time, that if you really cared, you'd make an exception. And in the past, maybe you've caved just to keep the peace. But consistency says, no, this is how I handle this every time. Calmly, clearly, without over-explaining. It's not about being rigid. It's about being reliable to yourself. You're teaching them that your words mean something, that your boundaries have weight, that your actions don't swing with their moods. Here's the truth most people miss: consistency isn't just for them, it's for you. Because when you stay steady, you stop carrying the mental chaos of wondering, what did I do wrong this time? You start to trust yourself again. You know what you'll say, how you'll respond, and where your limits are. And that kind of steadiness builds confidence that manipulation can't shake. The first few times you hold consistent, they'll push harder. They'll test to see if you really mean it. That's normal. Manipulators don't give up their tactics easily. But over time, the more consistent you are, the more exhausting it becomes for them to try. They lose the thrill of control because there's nothing left to control. And while they may not admit it, deep down they know they can't bend you the way they used to. That's the quiet power of consistency. It doesn't shout, it doesn't fight, it doesn't chase approval. It simply stands. And in that steady standing, manipulation loses its edge. You're no longer caught in the guessing game, no longer running in circles to meet ever-changing demands. You're grounded, clear, and free. And that's the kind of strength they can't twist because it doesn't come from them. It comes from you. Criticism is the language a narcissist speaks fluently. It's sharp, it's constant, and it's designed to cut you just enough to keep you questioning yourself. They don't always come at you with yelling or outright insults. Sometimes it's the subtle remarks, the backhanded compliments, the look of disappointment that says more than their words ever could. Over time, you start to anticipate it. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you sounded foolish, You change the way you dress, the way you talk, even the way you laugh, just to avoid giving them something new to target. And before you realize it, their criticism has become the loudest voice in the room, drowning out your own. But here's the truth: criticism only has power when it lands on shaky ground. When you're unsure of yourself, their words dig deep. When you're steady in who you are, they fall flat. That's where confidence comes in. Not the loud, boastful kind of confidence that tries to prove something, but the quiet, rooted kind that says, I know who I am, and I don't need your approval to keep standing in it. That kind of confidence speaks louder than any criticism they can throw your way. Imagine this: they take their usual jab at you. Maybe it's about how you're too sensitive, or not good enough at something, or never measure up in some way. In the past, that comment might have sent you spiraling, questioning yourself, maybe even apologizing for things that weren't wrong. But when you're confident, your response shifts. You don't argue, you don't defend, you don't shrink. You simply let it pass through without letting it pierce you. That silence, that steadiness, that refusal to be defined by their words, that's what unnerves them. Because for the first time, their criticism doesn't control you. Confidence isn't built overnight. It's built in the small choices where you remind yourself of your own worth. It's in keeping promises to yourself. It's in surrounding yourself with voices that build you up instead of tear you down. It's in remembering that their criticism often says more about their insecurities than about your reality. And the more you practice this, the less room their words have to echo in your head. You'll notice something shift inside you as confidence grows. The things they used to say that left you rattled start to sound hollow. The fear of their opinion starts to lose its grip. And instead of asking, what's wrong with me, you start asking, why do they need to tear me down in the first place? That perspective doesn't just protect you, it frees you. Because criticism may still come, but it no longer dictates your value. And that's what makes a narcissist miserable. They can criticize all they want, but if you're no longer bending under the weight of it, they lose their leverage. Your confidence becomes louder than their negativity, not because you shouted back, but because you didn't need to. You stood firm in yourself, and when you stand there long enough, you realize something powerful: their criticism was never the truth. Your confidence always was. One of the hardest things to do in a relationship with a narcissist is to walk away without explaining yourself. Because if you're like most people, you've been conditioned to believe that you owe everyone a reason, especially someone who's accusing, questioning, or demanding one. You've probably spent hours of your life trying to defend your choices, replaying conversations in your head, giving speech after speech, hoping that if you could just explain it the right way, they'd finally understand. But the truth is, they were never trying to understand. They were trying to keep you tangled. And the more you explain, the more rope you hand them to twist around you. This is where walking away without explaining becomes powerful. It's not about being cold or cruel. It's not about shutting someone down. It's about recognizing when a conversation is no longer about connection, but about control. When the back and forth stops being a bridge and starts being a trap, you don't owe another sentence. You don't owe another round of defending yourself to someone who's already decided to see you through their own distorted lens. Choosing to walk away is choosing your peace. Choosing not to explain is refusing to hand over your dignity for the sake of their comfort. The challenge is that everything in you will want to fill the silence. You'll feel that pull, the tightness in your chest, the urge to justify, the fear of being misunderstood. That's normal. It's the part of you that still hopes for fairness, that wants to be seen clearly. But here's the reality with someone committed to misunderstanding you. Your explanations are never about clarity. They're about buying you back into a fight that never ends. And the only way to win that fight is not to play it. Walking away without explaining doesn't mean you don't have a voice. It means you've learned to use it wisely. It means you know your worth is not up for debate. It's the difference between shouting at a locked door and realizing you can walk out the other way. That shift is strength. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need an audience, the kind that trusts, I don't need you to agree with me for me to know who I am. Yes, they'll try to pull you back in. They'll say you're avoiding, accuse you of being disrespectful, paint you as the problem. That's part of the pattern. But over time, you'll see something important. Every time you walk away without explaining, you're breaking that pattern. You're reminding yourself that you don't owe endless access to your energy, your words, your reasons. And that's what makes a narcissist miserable, because their power depends on your participation. Take that away, and their control has nowhere to land. The silence you leave behind isn't weakness, it's strength. It's the strength of knowing that peace doesn't come from convincing someone else. Peace comes from standing firm in yourself and walking away when the cost of staying is your dignity. That strength is quiet, steady, and unshakable, and it's the very thing they can't take from you. Emotional distance is one of the hardest things to practice when you care deeply about someone, especially if that person has made it their habit to pull you into their storms. You don't want to feel cold or detached. You don't want to be the kind of person who stops caring. But emotional distance isn't about not caring. It's about caring in a way that doesn't cost you your peace. It's the ability to stay connected to your values, your clarity, and your well-being, even when someone else is doing everything they can to throw you off balance. When you're entangled with a narcissist, the lines blur quickly. Their moods become your moods. Their approval or disapproval feels like a measure of your worth. Their chaos leaves you feeling like you're constantly on edge, waiting for the next explosion. That's what it means to be emotionally enmeshed. Your sense of calm rises and falls with theirs. And over time, that leaves you drained, anxious, and questioning yourself. Emotional distance is what breaks that cycle. It's the steady reminder that you are not responsible for their reactions, their feelings, or their choices. It shows up in small but powerful ways. When they throw out a cutting remark, and instead of rushing to defend yourself, you pause and let it sit where it belongs with them. When they spin a story to make you the villain, and instead of scrambling to rewrite it, you quietly hold to what you know is true. When they try to bait you into another argument, and instead of jumping in, you calmly choose not to engage. That is emotional distance. It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop letting their emotions dictate yours. At first, it feels uncomfortable. You may even feel guilty, like you're pulling away or abandoning them. But what you're really doing is protecting the part of you that has been worn thin by carrying weight that was never yours to carry. Emotional distance is not rejection. It's self-preservation. It's creating a healthy boundary between what belongs to you and what belongs to them. Because without that boundary, their storms will always spill into your skies. And here's the quiet strength in it. When you keep that distance, you start to hear yourself again. You notice your own feelings separate from theirs. You recognize that just because they're angry doesn't mean you have to be unsettled. Just because they disapprove doesn't mean you've failed. Just because they try to control the narrative doesn't mean you've lost your voice. That space gives you room to breathe, to think, and to choose your response with clarity instead of reflex. A narcissist hates emotional distance because it takes away the control they depend on. They can't pull the same strings if you're no longer attached to them. They can't drag you into the same cycles if your peace no longer rises and falls with their moods. And while they may accuse you of being cold or uncaring, what you're really doing is protecting the one thing they can't be trusted with, your peace. That peace is yours to guard, and emotional distance is how you keep it safe. Confusion is one of the most effective tools a narcissist uses. They twist conversations, shift blame, and rewrite history in ways that leave you second-guessing yourself. What actually happened becomes blurry. You remember the details clearly, but somehow, after going back and forth with them, you walk away unsure of your memory, unsure of your feelings, unsure if you're even being fair. And when that happens enough times, confusion starts to feel normal. You begin to believe that maybe you are too sensitive, maybe you do overact, maybe you are the problem after all. That fog is heavy, and it's designed to be. Because confusion keeps you stuck, and you're stuck, they stay in control. Clarity is what breaks that fog. Clarity is the decision to trust what you know to be true, even when someone else insists otherwise. It's saying to yourself, I remember what I felt in that moment, and I believe myself. Clarity doesn't need to win the argument. It doesn't need the other person to nod in agreement. It stands on its own. That's what makes it powerful, and that's what makes it so frustrating to someone who depends on keeping you tangled up in their version of reality. Think about a time when you were pulled into one of those endless cycles of confusion. Maybe they said something sharp and you called it out. Instead of owning it, they flipped it back on you. You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. That never happened. And suddenly, instead of talking about what they said, the whole conversation shifted to whether or not your feelings were valid. That's the sleight of hand. They distract you from the real issue by planting doubt. And the more doubt grows, the less sure you feel about your own ground. That's exactly where they want you. Off balance, chasing clarity from them, instead of finding it in yourself. Choosing clarity is what pulls you back to solid ground. It looks like stepping out of the argument in your head where you try to convince them of the truth. It looks like pausing in the middle of their denial and saying to yourself, I don't need them to confirm it. I know what I heard. I know how it felt. That shift doesn't stop them from trying to confuse you, but it stops you from handing over your sense of reality, and that changes everything. Here's the hard part. Clarity is quiet. Confusion is loud. Confusion fills the room with arguments, accusations, and back and forth debates that go nowhere. Clarity often doesn't say much at all. It's a calm decision to hold steady in what you know. That quiet can feel unnatural at first. You'll want to explain, to prove, to defend. But over time, you'll see that clarity doesn't need defending. It only needs your trust. When you choose clarity, you also begin to see the patterns for what they are. The circular conversations, the sudden changes of topic, the rewriting of what was said just minutes earlier. You start to recognize them not as evidence that you're confused, but as evidence of their manipulation. That's a turning point. Because once you name the pattern, You stop blaming yourself for it. You stop wondering what's wrong with you and start seeing what's actually happening in front of you. That awareness is part of clarity, too. It's not just about knowing what you feel. It's about seeing the dynamic clearly and refusing to play along with the confusion. Sometimes clarity means walking away from the conversation altogether. Not in anger, not in silence meant to punish, but in peace. Saying to yourself, this is going nowhere, and I don't need to stay here to know the truth. Other times, clarity means responding in simple, grounded ways. Instead of defending yourself against 10 different accusations, you calmly say, that's not true, and let it rest. You don't have to match their chaos with chaos of your own. That's the gift of clarity. It simplifies what they've tried to complicate. And here's what you'll notice as you grow in clarity, the confusion starts to lose its power. Their words still come, but they don't sink as deep. You feel the sting, but you recover faster. You stop leaving every conversation drained and doubting yourself. Instead, you walk away with your head a little higher because you know what's real. That inner knowing becomes your anchor. Of course, clarity doesn't mean the relationship suddenly becomes easy. They may get louder, sharper, more insistent when their usual tactics stop working. But that's only a sign that your clarity is doing its job. The goal isn't to change them, it's to stop letting them change you. And each time you choose clarity, you reclaim a piece of yourself that confusion tried to steal. Clarity is also what reconnects you to your voice. For so long, their confusion may have made you doubt not just your memory, but your right to speak. You may have swallowed words, silenced your own feelings, convinced yourself it wasn't worth bringing up. But when you trust your clarity, you start to speak again. You say what you mean without twisting yourself into knots to avoid their disapproval. You state your boundaries without over-explaining. You begin to live from a place of truth, not fear of being misunderstood. And that is where your power lies. A narcissist hates clarity because it pulls back the curtain on their game. They can't twist what you refuse to untangle. They can't confuse what you've already decided to see plainly. And while they may never admit it, clarity unsettles them because it shows them that their grip on your mind is slipping. What once left you spinning now leaves you steady. What once silenced you now strengthens your voice. Choosing clarity over their confusion doesn't happen in one big leap. It happens in steady steps, in trusting your memory of what was said, in naming how it made you feel, in refusing to argue yourself out of your own truth. And with each step, you'll feel the fog lift a little more. You'll breathe a little easier. You'll see yourself a little clearer. Because clarity isn't just about seeing them for who they are. It's about finally seeing yourself again. And when you stand in that kind of clarity, no amount of confusion can take it away. When you've lived in a relationship where your voice was minimized, your feelings dismissed, and your perspective constantly questioned, trusting yourself again can feel almost impossible. You don't even realize how much ground you've lost until one day you're staring at a simple decision and you're paralyzed by it. Not because you don't know the answer, but because you don't trust your own answer. That's what happens when you've been trained to second guess yourself over and over. The constant, that's not what I said, or you're imagining things, or you're too sensitive chips away at your confidence until you stop leaning on your own judgment and start relying on theirs. Even when you know deep down it doesn't feel right. That's not weakness on your part. That's the impact of living in an environment that constantly told you your inner compass was broken. The quiet power of trusting yourself again is about rebuilding that compass. And it doesn't come back with a shout, it comes back with a whisper. It starts in small moments, like reminding yourself that you did hear the tone in their voice that felt dismissive, even if they deny it. It's believing that your body tensed for a reason, that your tears weren't an overreaction, that your gut wasn't lying to you. Self-trust grows each time you choose to side with your own reality, even when someone else tries to convince you it doesn't exist. That's not arrogance, and it's not selfishness. It's dignity. It's the basic right to believe your own eyes and ears. One of the hardest parts about trusting yourself again is that at first, it feels uncomfortable. When you've been conditioned to defer to someone else's version of events, believing your own perspective feels like rebellion. You may even feel guilty for it. You'll wonder if you're being unfair, if you're judging too harshly, if you're just like them, because you finally decided not to bend this time. That's the residue of manipulation talking. Because the truth is, trusting yourself doesn't mean you're closed off to feedback. It doesn't mean you never admit when you're wrong. It just means you stop abandoning yourself at the first sign of conflict. Trusting yourself again also changes the way you communicate. Instead of over-explaining your boundaries to earn their approval, you start setting them with calmness and clarity. Instead of apologizing for how you feel, you start naming your feelings with confidence. Instead of asking, do you think it's okay if you begin saying, this is what I've decided. And it's not loud or forceful, it's steady. That steadiness is what unnerves someone who's used to controlling you through doubt. Because the less you look to them for confirmation, the less power they hold over you. Think about how many times you silenced yourself because you didn't trust that what you had to say was valid. You swallowed your opinions, avoided hard conversations, laughed off hurtful comments just to keep the peace. And in doing that, you slowly distanced yourself from your own truth. Rebuilding self-trust is the act of returning home to yourself. It's telling that silenced version of you, I hear you now, you matter, and I won't keep pushing you aside just to make someone else more comfortable. That is not an easy shift, but it's a life-changing one. Here's something important to understand. Self-trust doesn't always feel strong in the moment. Sometimes it feels shaky. Sometimes it feels like your voice is trembling or your stomach is in knots while you stand your ground. But strength isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward, even when fear is present. Each time you side with your own truth, even if your voice shakes, you're strengthening the muscle of self-trust. And like any muscle, the more you use it, the stronger it becomes. The quiet power in all of this is that you don't need anyone else to validate it. You don't need their applause, their agreement, or even their understanding. Self-trust isn't loud. It doesn't need a stage. It's in the quiet moments when you look back at a situation and realize, I didn't betray myself this time. I listened to me. That's where the power is, in the private victories no one else sees, but that build up into a life of confidence and peace. And yes, there will still be times you doubt yourself. Healing doesn't erase that overnight, but the difference is that doubt no longer gets the final say. Self-trust is learning to listen to doubt without bowing to it. It's saying, I hear you, but I know what's true for me. And when you do that enough times, the grip of doubt loosens. The voices that once kept you spinning lose their volume, and your own voice, the one that was buried under layers of criticism and gaslighting, grows clearer. This isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming grounded, because life will always bring challenges. People will always bring opinions, and relationships will always require compromise. But when you trust yourself, you stop being easily swayed by every external push. You stop handing over the steering wheel of your life to whoever shouts the loudest. Instead, you begin to navigate with your own compass. And that compass may not always lead to the easiest path, but it will always lead to the truest one. The quiet power of trusting yourself again is that you finally get to rest. Rest from the endless cycle of second guessing. Rest from the exhausting chase for their approval. Rest from twisting yourself into someone else's version of acceptable. When you trust yourself, you can breathe again. You can stand in a room with people who misunderstand you and not crumble. You can make decisions without replaying them 100 times in your mind. You can leave conversations where you're not respected without writing a 3-page explanation to justify why. And maybe the most beautiful part is this: trusting yourself again reconnects you to joy. Because when you stop doubting every choice and every feeling, you start saying yes to things that actually give you life. You take risks, you try new things, you open your heart in safe places. You stop living under the weight of fear and start living under the freedom of self-respect. That's the quiet power no one can take from you. So if you feel shaky, if you still catch yourself wondering whether your perspective counts, let me tell you this: it does. You are not broken for doubting yourself. You were conditioned to. And just as you were conditioned to silence your voice, you can condition yourself to trust it again. Step by step, choice by choice, you rebuild that trust. And one day, you'll look back and realize that the voice you once thought was too quiet to matter is the very voice that saved you. That's the quiet power of trusting yourself again, and it's already in you, waiting for you to believe it.